Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.
Hi, I'm Gordon Raquel from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or, of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by Damian Del Borrello, whose work includes Ash vs. Evil Dead, Fear of the Walking Dead, and most recently, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, as sound designer. Welcome to the show, Damian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Gordon.
I guess my first question for you is for a show as epic as The Rings of Power, how do you start? What is your first step? Because I feel like that would be a daunting task if someone came to me and was like, you remember that series that everyone loves? We're going to do a follow-up. So how did you approach it and figure out what it was going to sound like?
Yeah. I guess the first reaction was like, "Wait, what? You want me to do that, huh?" But no, look. I guess the for this particular show, the structure and the plan from the very start was to get on early. So my supervising partner and I, Robbie Stambler, we started pretty much the day that the shooting started. So we were embedded with the picture editorial department, and so the idea was to sort of take it in chunks. So as things got shot, the editors would go straight into a sequence cut, and sort of start assembling it that way. And then when there was something ready, maybe by the end of the week, they would turn it over to us, and we would start to put it together. And the idea was to sort of do that all the way through, right up until we get to a fully formed kind of episode, and then consolidate all of those little parts, and then start again to sort of piece together and build it that way. I guess COVID kind of put the brakes on that plan, and we sort of
Mhm.
had to rethink stuff. But I guess we weren't as embedded with the picture department because we're separated physically, and we had to sort of figure out a way to work remotely. But we still did that kind of idea, chipping away at the mountain, so that we're not getting turned over this giant episode and having to start from scratch.
I'm going to interrupt this interview for 1 second. We want to thank PixelView, one of our sponsors. They're a streaming solution for filmmakers. PixelView lets you stream your work to remote clients for easy collaboration, and it works with both on-set teams and post-production teams. With built-in video chat, you can discuss and make changes in real time and stream directly from your editing software. Or you can use the hardware encoder to stream from DaVinci Resolve or the camera on set. See the promo code and the link in the video description below. Well, how did you, because like I said, the original movies were very iconic. So how do you ensure that you respect the original sound, but also carve your own path and allow yourself to be creative on this series?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm in Wellington right now. I live in Wellington, and I basically moved to Wellington to work with some of the people who worked on the original films. So I'm very from the start. I was very aware of the legacy that comes
Mhm.
with the Lord of the Rings, and in a way, it is harder than starting from scratch, because it's about recognizing what made those films so great in terms of the sound, um, trying to get to that point
Mhm.
as a starting point, and then take it further. Um, and I guess the technology has come a long way. I mean, it's 20 years since those original films. So even though those sounds are so incredible, like what we can do now, and the sort of the technology, the libraries, the tools, like Pro Tools, and the software based synthesizers and
Mhm.
samplers and all that sort of stuff has come a long way. We have a lot more tools on our belt. So I guess from a creative perspective, we had to figure out what made those first films so good in terms of sound, and it was that naturalistic, organic sound that was more. I guess people sometimes describe it as like a documentary style. So it's
Okay.
not these sort of giant, sort of fantastical sounds, more natural sounding, like in the world. Um, so and the foundation of that is the synergy between hard sound effects and Foley, and sort of the marriage of those two, sort of giving you all of the detail
Mhm.
but sounding very organic, right? And so one of the one of the things that we knew we had to do early on was get a fantastic Foley team on. And we're fortunate to have one of the best in the world right here in New Zealand. And so our collaboration, our workflow was um, more or less like giving the Foley team all of our sound effects stems, so that as a starting point, before they even recorded anything, they knew what the bed was. They knew all of the parts that would make up the soundtrack in the end. I mean, obviously, we were revising a lot as we went along, but they were able to build into their recordings sounds that complement the sound effects that we already had in there. So a lot of the time we would build in, in terms of the frequency range, we would build in a lot of the low end, a lot of the big impact stuff, and they would sort of record more higher frequency sort of stuff to give it that real full range detail. And I
Mhm.
think that shows in the final track. All of that detail is playing at a very sort of proud level, and I think that just adds to that, um, the sort of relationship between this show and the original films.
Now I have two questions from that. And one of them is a selfish question. And that is one of my favorite things is to listen to people try to describe sound effects to Foley artists because they have to, they're like, no, it's like a woo, like when you hear things. And what was the trickiest sound you had to describe to the Foley team?
Oh, well, I mean, I've been working with those guys for about 10 years, so we've got a really good shorthand. I guess we didn't, because we had so much time
Mhm.
in the lead up before bringing Foley on. Like, so I mean, I was on the show for 2.5 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Robbie and I were working, just the two of us, for over a year, even before we even had other sound effects editors or the dialogue team on. So by the time we actually handed something over to the Foley team, we had this like pretty much fully temped out episode.
Mhm.
So in terms of the communication, that made it so much easier. The only real communication after we gave them all of those sound effects pre-dubs, we basically was them asking us questions like, oh, okay, so um, if this is how this is going to work, we're just going to give you that. Is that all right? It looks like, so basically we would also temp up a lot of Foleys, and sometimes that would actually stay with the track, and if the
Mhm.
Foley team would sometimes say, "Oh, that is the perfect sound. That's exactly what we would record anyway. So let's just leave that in and move on." You
Yeah.
know?
That's Now, my other question from that is more because you talked about like the scope and like really expanding the sounds and using the full range that's possible. But one of the struggles when I've talked to other sound designers is, you don't, unfortunately, you can't control where people are going to watch this. So they might be on the subway watching this on their phone, or they might be, in their own private theater watching this. So when you work with the mixer, how did you guys work together to figure out or make sure that whatever environment you're in, you're still getting this amazing sound?
Yeah, I mean, this was like an ongoing discussion, and I got to say, I encourage everyone to see this on the biggest possible screen with the best possible speakers. But we did come to the uh, to the understanding of, it might be listened to on one of these, it might be listened to on a sound bar or on a laptop. We realized that very early on. So we put in a lot more work to make that the translation better. So Bo Borders and Lindsay Alvarez, our amazing mixers, would spend an extra amount of time on doing a separate stereo mix. Because the stereo mix is the stereo mix. There's no additional files that are created for the iPhone or for a soundbar. It's that same mix. So the key to making that translation work was a tweaking of that dynamic range, but in a way that complements or sort of carries forward the creative intent of the full-blown Dolby Atmos mix. And so that was, something as simple as turning up the ambiences a little bit more to make sure that they were heard on the smaller speakers, and also pulling back on the very big music moments, maybe the really big sound effects moments, just a little bit more, so that they fit within that smaller range. And I think I've got to say it's one of the best sounding 2-tracks I've ever heard. And I think that's a compliment to Bo and to Lindsay, who put in that extra work to make the 2-track work.
Did you guys listen? Because I remember, when I started, it was on actual film, and, I would go hang out with friends who were in bands, and it'd be like, okay, now we got to go listen to it in the car, because that's like the worst environment. So did you guys like pull out the old, iPhone or whatever and watch the whole series on it?
Yeah, look, we were fortunate enough. We had the time to do these critical listening tests. So we were obviously mixing in a theater style room, you'd call it a mid-sized room.
Yeah.
But then we'd go downstairs to my sound design suite and listen on bookshelf speakers. We would go back to Bo's apartment that night and listen on his sound bar. We'd have headphones. We'd have laptops. And just as an extension of that, our showrunners weren't even actually in the building, where they weren't in the country when we were doing these mixes. So our reviews had to be stereo. So, and the system that we used to send them files and do remote collaboration through was allowing us to see what device that they were using and what they were listening to.
That's really cool.
So, yeah. So we could go, we could sort of filter the notes in a way and go, if the note is, there's not enough bass on the big hit, and we'd look at who said that note, and he's listening on a laptop. We'll check it, and we'll see if it has any truth in a mid-sized room. But if it sounds good to us, that note is probably addressed, and it's just the playback system. I guess we did a lot of work to try and make that work across as many devices as possible. Yeah, because we also know, like, there's so many people who want to watch this show. Like, this is a really important show to a lot of people. And so just to do the service to the fans, to make sure that, if you're listening on an iPhone, it should sound really good. Like, that's a responsibility that we definitely felt.
Now, you worked on this for a year before, the whole team sort of arrived. So how did you determine, and I don't even know if this is like really a question, but I always wonder, where does like a medieval film or a film set in medieval times and the sound for Lord of the Rings begin? Because there's a lot of metal sounds, there's a lot of horse sounds, there's a lot of similarities between the two, but they sound distinctly different.
Yeah, okay. I guess the fundamental thing with the fantasy genre is magic, right? Magic and creatures, and I think so. One of the, I guess, maybe taking a little bit of a sidestep here, one of the things that was pretty well established in the original films was
Mhm.
the sound of the unseen world, and what we called ring time, and when Frodo puts on the ring, and it's sort of, we go into the unseen world and we hear the Sauron's voice, the Eye of Sauron, sort of speaking through the ring. And so, what does that sound like if there's no ring?
Mhm.
So that was a pretty important motif to start developing early on. And I guess for me, as a bit of a nerdy fan of the films, but also conceptual sound designer, we had this wealth of sort of knowledge in the Tolkien lore and sort of all of the canon. So I quickly found a website, tolkiengateway.net, and that was a tab that stayed open on my computer for nearly 2.5 years. So, in in doing a bit of a deep dive in there, understanding um, the sort of the godlike
Mhm.
character of Iluvatar, the creator of all, and so I sort of honed in on that as being okay. So that's the power, the magic comes from the creator. So it's
Yeah.
like a religious aspect within the story world. And so what would the whispers of Iluvatar, what would the thoughts of Iluvatar sound like? And I guess it sort of comes down to this idea of the whispers.
Yeah.
So one of the key sounds to make that up was this Kenyan chant, this incantation, which was we I basically worked with the dialect coach who was working on set with the actors to work through the Elvish and all the different accents, and she gave me this chance to record and to play with. So I basically went into the booth and recorded myself. This is very early on. This was
Yeah.
within the
Yeah.
first month, and so I just recorded a whole lot of different lengths, different intensities, um, uh, different volumes, and all that stuff, and just to get a quick palette together, and to start processing them and putting them in when magic was happening, and maybe when there was something mystical, something supernatural happening that was not necessarily in the world, but we had to get a sense that there was something magical happening.
Mhm.
And I guess the intention for that was to to build a palette, present it, and then sort of get an actor in, get like a professional actor in, and revoice it, and then rebuild it with that material. But I guess the in the end, it worked so well just with what we had temped up that it
Mhm.
stayed in, and so that was the final sounds of Iluvatar's whispers, um, uh, in all of the magic. Whenever we have magic action or elements, there's always an element of the whisper in there, and that sort of for me that was the thing to bring something new to the sound of the unseen world, and I guess it's also making reference to the original Sauron ring time moments. The palette, the way that we processed that sound was quite similar. We actually, for me, I used some of those same plugins that the original team used. Because I know a few of those guys from working down here in Wellington, and so it was a little tip of the hat to the original films.
Now I apologize. Someone is drilling nearby, so if you hear that, I apologize.
Um,
Okay.
no, can't hear it. Oh, good.
So now this is a bit of a spoiler, so anyone watching should, skip ahead. But Mount Doom's explosion, how it's such a massive set piece. So how did you approach it? How did you tackle the individual moments and like the grandiose sort of scale of the explosions, that type of thing for it?
Well, look, it's probably one of the hardest things to do. It's that sense of scale, and I guess that sequence, like, and I think the big sort of credit for that sequence has to go to Bo Borders, our sound effects mixer, and a lot of to do with Robbie Stambler. So there was just lots and lots of layers, and it was almost like moment to moment, the balance of those layers had to change dramatically because of the perspective changes, the perspective shifts. I mean, bearing in mind, there's also massive music. So Bear McCreary's score is incredible, but it is big and it is very consistent through that whole sequence. There were some fantastic sort of moments with the the lava bombs as they were sort of falling, and so it's almost like snapshots of shot to shot, being like we have the giant sort of rumbles and there's the cloud which has lightning and the screaming of the townspeople, and so depending on what we're seeing, all of those elements are like dramatically changing in level. They're almost always present, but a lot of that came together in the final mix. If you were to hear what it sounded like as its individual stems, they're very full and very consistent, and it's not really the type of thing that you can not build out in that way, because you have to have the dynamics from shot to shot, depending on what we're seeing and depending on whose small arc that we're following in that scene. But yeah, like I said, massive credit to Bo Borders because I guess the key thing there is like if you're hearing everything all at once, it just becomes so noisy. We don't really understand what's happening moment to moment, and so that was sort of like a thing that only we could address in the final mix.
Well, it's funny because like there is that one moment that really stuck out for me, and it's almost like the creators were like, okay, we have to show up James Cameron where, in Titanic, the guy hit the wheel, and this one is like the two guys are looking at each other, and just one of those fireballs hits him like dead on and just like sort of explodes in this sort of grandiose moment. And I was just like, oh, that was crazy.
Yeah,
Amazing
I
sound.
loved I
Yeah.
loved the sound. That's the lava bomb. That was the Robbie Stambler special. That was sort of he spent quite a bit of time, and we were sort of I was feeding back, and we were kind of going back and forth. It was just that combination of like rocket, like jet, with like a liquid kind of element as it hit, but also like an explosion. Lots of layers in those individual sounds.
What would you say was the most difficult scene for you to work on in this from a creative perspective?
Well, I guess from a creative perspective, but also from a like an overall show uh, perspective, is so that the troll, the ice troll at the start was because we were in episode one. It was such an important thing to set the tone of the whole show. This giant action set piece with uh, a creature that is a troll. We've seen them before, but this is a new type of troll, and so there was lots of obviously action, fighting. There was the vocal of the troll, and also the music was huge. There was a lot of loop group, so all of the elves were recorded as sort of individuals, and this was really a big job for Paula Fairfield. So she came on as our sound designer and was leading the charge on all of the creature vocals. And so she took. So we had done a version early on to help the picture editorial team tighten that edit up and to give a sense of the rhythm and the pacing. But then Paula came in and sort of did that final version. And I remember Robbie and I receiving that first pass that Paula did, and just going, "Wow, this is ready to go to the stage." Paula is incredible. She's so experienced, but what she brought to that creature, all the little sort of nuanced vocals, and also she did all of the presence, all of the big footsteps, and all that stuff to give it that sense of scale. Was it just like, before that it was a bit of a stressful scene because it was a setup, and we'd built out all of the battle stuff, we built out all of the vocals, and we knew the music was going to be big, and the actual vocals of Preacher was the thing that just made it all work.
How many tracks did you have going into the mix?
Look, I don't know exactly, but we had two separate playback machines, one for dialogue and music, and I think the sound effects, and the other one was the sound effects, so it's Foley, sound effects, and backgrounds. Off the top of my head, might have been somewhere in the order of 800 tracks on the sound effects side of things, and maybe a little less on the music and dialogue side. So I guess on the music side, we had lots of 5.1 premix stems, so all of the music, the sort of groups of instruments. So that would have added a lot to the track count on there. So look, maybe in total, somewhere in the order of 1,500, 1,600, maybe more. I'd have to double check that, but it's not really something that we basically have a template that can expand and contract depending on the scene. Obviously, not all those tracks were playing back at any one time, but certainly in that troll fight, that probably would have been one of the biggest. And also that stuff in episode 6 with all of the battle stuff, and also probably the Mount Doom explosion. Yeah.
No, I have one last question that I like to ask everyone in interview. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Look, I guess there's I put my film school hat on and go, well, I just love resetting my my north when it comes to sound, and my touchstone film for sound is Apocalypse Now. It's not a feel good film, but it certainly brings me back to the idea of what's important in sound in terms of using sound design as a conceptual tool, and I think that's just for me such an inspiration, and also as a mixer, understanding how to craft a mix that is helping the audience to understand rather than just building spectacle. It really, that film does all of that in such an elegant way. And it's almost the perfect film for sound.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Oh, thanks so much, Gordon. Yeah, it's really fun, and I'm glad you're enjoying the show, and I'm stoked to be talking about it.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for season 2.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.
Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.